Mr. Gonzalez, how much did AbbVie spend on litigation and settlements from 2013 to 2018?
I don't have that number offhand. I won't be happy to give it to you.
Okay, $1.6 billion, $2.45 billion on R&D, $1.6 billion in litigation and settlements. What about marketing and advertising? How much does AbbVie spend on that?
Well, marketing and advertising, we spend about $4 billion a year.
Yep, 4.7, $1 billion. How about executive compensation, 2013 to 2018?
2013 to 2018, it's probably on average about $60 million a year.
Try 334 on for size. Now, how much did AbbVie spend on stock buybacks and dividends to enrich your shareholders from 2013 to 2018?
Well, stock buybacks, if you actually look at just pure stock buybacks, it would be about $13 billion.
Stock buybacks and dividends is the question, sir.
Dividends, and have to come back with a number for that over that period of time.
$50 billion. So, Mr. Gonzalez, you're spending all this money to make sure you make money rather than spending money to invest in, develop drugs, and help patients with affordable life-saving drugs. You lie to patients when you charge them twice as much for an unimproved drug, and then you lie to policymakers when you tell us that R&D justifies those price increases. The big pharma fairy tale is one of groundbreaking R&D that justifies astronomical prices. But the pharma reality is that you spend most of your company's money making money for yourself and your shareholders. And the fact that you're not honest about this with patients and with policymakers, that you're feeding us lies, that we must pay astronomical prices to get innovative treatments is false. The American people, the patients, deserve so much better. I yield back.
I'm not saying that when you see Katie Porter take out the whiteboard that it's already too late, but yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm saying. This is Katie Porter accusing AbbVie CEO Richard Gonzalez of lying to Americans and policymakers about why the pharmaceutical giant has dramatically increased the prices of some of its most popular drugs. The House Oversight Committee released a report finding that AbbVie took in billions in revenue by virtue of raising prices on two of its biggest drugs, Humira and Imbruvica, over the course of the last 20 years. Since 2003, AbbVie has raised the price of Humira by over 470% with 27 individual price increases, netting the company more than $20 billion in annual revenue for the last 3 years for just that drug alone. As it stands, the price of the rheumatoid arthritis drug Humira was increased to $77,000 for a year's supply, while the price of its cancer drug Imbruvica was raised to $181,000 per year. And as if that wasn't appalling enough, the committee report also details how AbbVie exploited the US patent system to fend off competitors. For example, the company had applied for more than 200 patents for Humira, known as a patent thicket, so that it could file multiple lawsuits based on those multiple patents against companies seeking to sell cheaper generic versions of the medicine. And look, it's one thing to want to make a profit, but it's entirely another to be aggressively anti-competitive by exploiting the patent system, all in service of raising costs to an astronomical level. Especially considering the people who will ultimately bear the brunt of those high costs are the people fighting for their own survival. Those profits don't just happen in a vacuum, they come from people who don't have a choice. And that's where Katie Porter's argument comes in, because at this point, pharmaceutical companies would come in and say that they're the ones who develop these drugs and they need to charge exorbitant amounts just to offset the sky-high costs that they incur. But that's not even close to where the majority of the funds go to. Katie Porter just showed, whiteboard and all, that the majority of the funds go toward processes that just make them money. That's it. Things like stock buybacks and dividends, like executive salary pay, like marketing, they're not falling over themselves pouring money into R&D the way they frame it, as if they're just skating by, as if their expenditures are all very noble and above board. They're getting rich, enormously rich, and their profits and their salaries are proof of that. Now look, I don't think I have to try and convince anyone of the predatory, greedy behavior wherein these pharmaceutical companies are more than happy to profit off their customers' desperation to survive. And it's gone on too long and protected by politicians on both sides of the aisle. And this isn't to demonize all pharmaceutical companies, because much of the work they do is absolutely necessary. The COVID vaccine in and of itself is a testament to that. But it's the naked pursuit of profits at any expense, like AbbVie's 27 price increases netting them $20 billion a year on one drug, when it becomes clear that the only consideration is money. which underscores the need for Congress to pass a law allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. And by the way, if you're in favor of allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices, which most people are, you'd probably find yourself in favor of Medicare for all, considering the same concept applies. Medicare for all is also referred to as single-payer healthcare. It's called single-payer because the single payer is the government, which negotiates on behalf of all Americans for the lowest prices on all aspects of healthcare, as opposed to having a fragmented insurance market where basically all Americans are out for themselves, negotiating on their own or through small pools. And when it's basically individuals up against insurance conglomerates, well, you can imagine how it goes for regular Americans. But when the government represents all Americans, suddenly we're in a much, much better negotiating position. Consider too, this isn't some novel concept. Just about every other industrialized nation on the face of the earth has already figured this out. And because those governments are actually interested in the health and well-being of their citizens, as opposed to working on behalf of the corporate interests that fund their re-elections, they took the obvious step of implementing single-payer programs. It is basically only the United States where we've entrenched the system that disproportionately benefits companies that profit from sickness, as opposed to adopting a system where health is rewarded, affordable, and accessible. And by the way, the fact that we're the only major country without the protections of a single-payer system means that the United States is the only country getting raked over the coals by insurance companies, drug companies, and pharmaceutical companies. Those businesses are actively targeting the US for price increases while cutting prices in the rest of the world. In other words, Americans get charged the most, we pay the most, and because the prices are so high, we can afford the least. We shoulder all of the burden and reap barely any of the benefit. And somehow our government, the people elected by us on both sides of the aisle to protect our interests, have decided that this is a good system. That's how you know that campaign checks are more important than people's lives. So at the end of the day, if you want to be protected from predatory pharmaceutical companies or any predatory business, elect politicians who aren't cashing those checks, who aren't carving out exemptions and loopholes, and who aren't looking out for their own political futures, but rather politicians who are looking out for you. Katie Porter is the first Democrat to represent California's 45th district since it was created in 1953. And she's proof that if you look out for people over profits, you won't need those checks from special interest groups in order to get reelected. To see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. And for a deeper dive, check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I discuss the week's top stories and interview major players in the world of politics, like Vice President Kamala Harris, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.